If your KitchenAid mixer gets stuck like this, don't throw it out just yet. We'll take this one apart and see if we can fix it. Step 1. Step 2 is remove this single screw in the back of the cover. That screw allows this band to come off, at which point you'll see a bunch more screws all the way around it. So I'm going to go ahead and pop all those off, and then I bet this whole top housing will come right off. I bet my problem is in this transmission housing on the front. Everything else looks pretty good, and the fact that it all does operate but gets stuck in one spot would lead me to believe it's either in this or in this part down here, which I'm not sure how that comes off yet. So I'm going to start by removing the 4 screws that hold this piece on and just see where that gets me. There we go. Got it off there. And there went the last screw I couldn't get out. Now that the top cover is removed from the transmission, you can see all the gears. This one in the back is directly connected to the motor. It turns this larger gear, which provides the gear reduction to give this tiny little motor enough power to run your attachments. That gear is connected to this worm gear, which turns this gear over here, which in turn powers whatever attachment you put on the bottom. If I pick this up, you can see it's nice and even all the way around. You want to see nice flat edges on the edge of your gear like that. If it's sharp, it's worn out. Now, see if I can get this one off. I can see it already, but if I pull it out, I'm not sure what holds it in there. Let me zoom this in. I've got you zoomed in, and on top of the gear you can see right here, this is a snap ring. That's what holds the gears to the shaft. So I've got to remove that, and then those gears should lift straight off of there. And this is going to be a pain in the butt to get it off probably. That one's surprisingly easy. So this is a pair of snap ring pliers. It's a really tiny, dinky one, but it actually works really good in these little snap rings. So as you squeeze the plier handles together, it spreads the ring apart, which releases it from the little slot that it lives in on the shaft there. So we'll remove this top gear. This gear runs your front attachment, that square drive on the front of your mixer. And this one right here, the next one down, is the one I'm after. Oh, there's more stuff to remove. Now that the top gear's off, there's a roll pin here I need to push out. And when I do that, this whole shaft, which is connected all the way down here to where you actually put your attachments, all that's going to fall out. At least I think it is. This is my first KitchenAid I've ever taken apart. I'm going to remove this part just so I can see a little bit better what I'm doing. It does fall out. I just had to smack it. So apparently the very last thing I can possibly remove from here is the piece I need. You can see this has no teeth at all right here. It's actually... Can I get that to where you can see it? There you go. You can see how it's dished in from left to right. It should be nice and straight across there. I'll go downstairs and hop on the computer, order a new one, and I'll show you the difference when it arrives. Well, it's a few days later and I've got my parts here. All I really probably had to replace was this one gear. But I thought as long as I'm in there doing it, I'm going to replace this worm gear as well. This right here is where this gear rides on, just like so. This is the original one, and just looking at it, you can't see much of a difference. If you look very closely right here, you can see it's slightly rounded over and a little sharp. If I run my finger this way, it kind of catches, whereas this gear is nice and even all the way across. This wasn't that much money. None of this was that much money. This thing was like 10 bucks. This one might have been like $30. I figured while I'm in there, might as well do both of them. This mixer's about 10 years old, so why not see if I can make it another 10 years. I got all this stuff on Amazon. I'll link it below in the description. If you buy it through there, I do get a little bit of a kickback from Amazon. I bought this grease on eBay. They do have grease on Amazon, but it was just cheaper there. I like CRC. And the kicker is you're going to want a food grade grease. That way if it does leak into whatever you're making, it's okay if you eat it. Probably not ideal, but won't kill you. So here's the original gear, and you can see those teeth are just destroyed. Especially when comparing it with the new one, you can see just how worn this one is. Now I went ahead and cleaned all the old grease out of here. Well, most of the old grease. You can see there's still some in there. I wasn't too terribly concerned about leaving a little bit of it in there. I'm not too worried about these two greases not meshing well. For me, the bigger concern was this gear no longer had any teeth on it, so where's all the teeth at? They're ground up in the grease. So I wanted to get the grease out of there to make sure there wasn't any big chunks left that were going to get caught between my new gears and instantly destroy those too. So I'm just going to put probably way too much grease in here, because that's kind of my tendency. Before we install the new gear, I'm going to grease the end of it where it is held by whatever this thing's called. Not sure what KitchenAid calls that thing. Just a liberal amount of grease on pretty much everything, because the only thing that's going to keep this cool when it's running is grease. So the one side just has that little collar deal. The other side actually has a very small roller bearing. There's the little roller bearing. Here's the top half of the cage. Put some grease on this portion here. And finally, this little thing. There we go. Just slobber grease pretty much everywhere on this. Then we're going to drop it back in place. Same thing here, when I install this, I'm going to put plenty of grease on it. Really load those teeth up. Because like I said, this is the only thing that's going to keep your mixture cool when it's running, is the grease on the gears. The next step is to put this tiny little pin back in that holds this shaft in, which is attached to whatever this thing's called. It holds that up tight with this gear, and that's what keeps it from falling out the bottom of the unit. After that pin's in there, we put this gear back in, which once again drives the accessories off the front, that little square drive up there. That's what this next gear does. Put tons of grease on it too. I really should have showed you this before I greased it, but this has got a square opening in it, and you can see in the middle it's got a slot for this pin. The top of this gear it's not square, it's rectangle. You need to line it up to where that rectangle and the pin are pointing the same way, and this gear will fully drop down over both of those. Now before I put the top half of this gear case back on, if you remember, there's one snap ring that goes in right here on top of this gear. I'm going to clean off some of this excess grease so we can hopefully see that groove. Then we'll just get the snap ring pliers, get the snap ring, slide it back on there. And man, I've really made a mess of this mixer. I've got grease everywhere. Okay, spread the snap ring, slide it back down, and you should hear it click into place once it's down all the way. There we go. It's locked on its shaft. That will keep this gear from rising up. Now here's the top half of the gear case. I've once again packed it with way too much grease. And now I just got to put the two halves back together. You can get this new gasket here. I clearly didn't bother doing that. I'm just going to reuse the one that I got on here already. I don't really think I need a new one for any reason in particular. And it should just go all the way back down on its own. If you've got to force it, that means something is not installed properly. Do not force this back on. It should set all the way down flush on its own. Now I just got to wipe up all this extra grease. There, that cleaned up pretty well. Now just run these 4 screws in. If you're tidier than me, you won't have to clean up. Alright, I'm going to give it one more quick wipe down, make sure I've got everything cleaned up here. Put the lid back on, and we're going to give it a test run. Nothing too crazy here, just setting the lid back in place. There we go. Then just the 2 screws on each side of it. Go ahead and start all 4 of these before you actually tighten any of them. That will make sure that everything is aligned properly. Reinstall the trim bezel. All right, does it work or did I waste 40 bucks? Perfect. I put pressure on it, it keeps going around, it doesn't get stuck back here like it was. Good as new. Well, hopefully you found this helpful. If your mixer's got a similar issue, don't throw it out. Take it apart. This whole thing was less than an hour. The longest part was waiting a couple days for the parts to show up from Amazon. Like I said, I probably only needed to get this one gear right here, which was about 10 bucks. If all you want to get is just this, it probably would fix it. If the worm gear that it runs on is also worn, I'd recommend getting that as well. Like I said, if you put grease in there, just make sure it's a good food grade. So if it does end up in your food, it's not going to make you sick. Jump down below in the description, follow the link to Amazon. All the parts you need will be right there. Stay tuned for the next one, and I'll see you then.